And it is, at this time, my great pleasure to introduce Mel Hernking, who is here representing the Boys and Girls Club of Massillon, our sponsor for today. We love to collaborate with the Boys and Girls Club. And Mel, would you like to come and tell us about our panel today?
Thanks, Marty. Abner Doubleday, the guy who invented the game that we are here to celebrate today, can't be with us because he's been deceased for many years. But we can now make a startling announcement that we do have his 3 illegitimate sons here who will be talking to you about the game that we all know and love. Let me introduce you to our panel. This gentleman here today is the 3rd most famous person ever to come out of Jamestown, New York, exceeded only by Lucille Ball and Shane Jackson. His great baseball, well, how do we want to say this? Not your greatest baseball memory, but his saddest baseball memory was the day that he found out the Cleveland Indians had traded Rocky Colavito to the Detroit Tigers for Harvey Keene, which started the demise of all professional sports in Northeast Ohio. We're still trying to recover from it. Our next guest is Mr. Dave Schultz. Dave Schultz, at the age of 5, went to his first baseball game at Briggs Stadium when his dad took him to see the Tigers play. One of his other great memories was when his grandpa took him to a museum to see old cars, and he has spent the balance of his life really doing both of those things because he's had a lifelong interest in baseball and also a lifelong interest in old cars. And since you were from the Detroit area, you probably thought the Colavito-Keene trade was pretty good.
Actually, I was as disappointed as Dave was when I saw the headlines that morning.
And here we have Judge Roland Centrone from the Massillon Municipal Court, who's been a baseball fan all of his life, and as a kid was a Brooklyn Dodger fan, so he could tell us a lot of stories about the boys of summer, particularly his boyhood idol, number 39, Roy Campanella. So Judge, we're delighted to have you here. David, we're delighted to have you. And Dave, these 3 guys have probably forgotten more about baseball than most of us have ever known. But, you know, and none of us are kids anymore until you get onto the subject that we all know and love. And then you'll see 4 guys here that have really never grown up. Fellas, go for it.
Thank you. Those of you who read the newspaper know that we were supposed to have a 4th guest with us today, and that was Mike Kirschberger. Mike can't be with us today. Mike is recovering from an illness, and he is just not 100%, and if anybody would have tried to be here and be with us, it was Mike. And I talked to him this morning, and he said, you know, I just don't think I can make it. Please give my regrets to everybody. And he was honored to be included with this group, and we were honored to have Mike with us because Mike does represent Massillon baseball. So Mike sends his regrets, and hopefully we'll all be here next year with Mike sitting with us. We are going to talk about Massillon baseball, and of course this town is known for football, but along the way some pretty famous baseball players came out of this town. And Roland and David and I are going to just touch on the most prominent folks who came out. And the first one, the earliest person to play in the major leagues, was actually a person, I wonder if anybody in our audience remembers the name of Herman Malloy.
Tug Malloy. Anybody remember Tug Malloy? Detroit Tigers.
Whoa, somebody's a ringer out there.
You know, one thing, Dave, that I always found interesting, when I first came to Massillon, and of course I knew Massillon was a great town for football, but their baseball heritage is really tied to your Detroit Tigers here. I just found that very interesting. Tug Malloy pitched for the Tigers back in the early 1900s. He was a contemporary of Ty Cobb and later on Bob Fatty Fothergill. How many of you have ever heard of Bob Fothergill? Okay, you know who Fatty Fothergill was. He played with Cobb right at the end of Cobb's career in the late 20s. He was a contemporary of Babe Ruth, as a matter of fact.
Fothergill was a really hard-hitting Detroit Tiger. Played for the Tigers in the 20s when the Tigers really weren't going anywhere. Cobb was the manager for several of those years, and Cobb was a really tough guy as a manager. He really wasn't a player's manager. But Fothergill was probably the first prominent Massillonian to be a Major League Baseball star. And unfortunately, Fothergill's career ended in 1933, just before the Tigers bought Mickey Cochran from the Philadelphia Athletics, and then won back-to-back pennants in 1934 and 35. But Fothergill was a real solid hitter.
But Fothergill was also one of the greatest characters of all time. Fothergill was the Hack Wilson of the American League. He was known as a fun-loving guy. Matter of fact, he got into a beer drinking contest one time with Babe Ruth, and he won. Believe it or not. He also, in that same contest, was Harry Heilman. I often wondered, did they name the Heilman beer after Harry Heilman?
No.
Well, he liked to drink beer too.
Well, yeah, he was a little heavy. That's why they gave him the name Fat.
Yeah, he was. He was about 5'10", 230 pounds, which is pretty solid for a Major League outfielder.
But
That
he
was
could hit.
generous.
But he could hit.
230 was very
Yeah,
generous.
sort of like they disguise.
When they were thinking about getting him on the team, Ty Cobb, who was the player manager then, said, we'll have to enlarge all the ballparks in the league if we keep him, because he's that big. It's story too.
Plus Leo DeRocher, who, if some of you know about Leo DeRocher, in his early career, he played with the New York Yankees. He, at one game, supposedly, he stopped the game as Fothergill was studying in the batter's box. And he told the umpire, he said, we can only have one player in the batter's box at a time. So you could tell that he was but you know, one of the things was, if you think about 1927 was that great year where the Yankees had their great team, Murderers Row that year. That was actually Fothergill's best year. He hit .359 that year. So
He had a great year. Unfortunately, his weight was what caught up with him, and he ended up with the Red Sox in '33 and retired, and he died, unfortunately, at the age of 40 in 1938. So he was a young man when he passed away, but he certainly was one of the first great baseball players to come out of Massillon. Now, another person who at that time, kind of go chronologically here, who was on the scene, and we don't always think of, was an umpire. And his name was Charles Cy Rigler.
how many people have you know who he was? Anybody know who Cy was? I know he lived here in town. Jim DeLong Sr. told me a story. When he was a kid, he remembered Cy Rigler. And as a matter of fact, he showed me a baseball that he had signed by Cy Rigler.
Cy Rigler was a good umpire, and he was an umpire at a time in the game in the teens and 20s when it didn't hurt to be a big man. He was about 6'2", 270, so he was not intimidated by any of the ball players who might have given him an argument. And Rigler in 1935, another person who died unexpectedly, he had just been named the head crew chief for the National League umpires, and he died. He died unexpectedly before he took over those duties. But the two things that he left us in baseball, he was the first umpire to use hand signs, ball and strike, and to verbally out loud say ball, strike. So that was his That was his legacy for Major League Baseball.
Plus, he umpired 10 World Series. There was only one other umpire, Bill Clem, who umpired more. The most famous World Series that he umpired was 1924, when the Washington Senators played the New York Giants. There was a hitter by the name of Earl Smith. They called him Oil because he was a tough guy. Hit a long fly ball to left field. Sam Rice, who was the outfielder for the Washington Senators, went back, reached over the fence, and supposedly caught the ball. And Cy was out there, and Cy called him out. Well, many people that day thought that he didn't catch the ball. And after the game, they interviewed Sam Rice, and he maintained that he did. Well, the story about that goes on because he really wouldn't say one way or the other whether he did until he died here, 3-4 years ago.
And it was in his will.
And it was in his will. He said, "I did catch the ball." So old Cy really went out on a limb there to call him.
And you know, some little known fact about Cy, since we're all Tigers, is that he played in 1903. He played right tackle for the Massillon Tigers, the original pro football team here in Massillon. That's where he got his start. He was a tough guy. And from what Dave was saying, you can see how important it was that he put this in his will 50 years later when I don't think anybody cared anymore.
One other guy that we talk about here that was somewhat of a legend here in town was a guy named Fred Bracci. And if some of you remember, Fred's gas station was right over there. Fred was not a native Massillonian. He was born in Alliance, Ohio, but he ended up here after his playing career. He played for the Boston Red Sox in 26-27, which was one of the worst teams in all of baseball. If you remember, after the 1918 World Series, if you remember, the curse of the Bambino, the Red Sox sold Babe Ruth. Actually, it was 1919. They sold him to the Red Sox because the owner of the Red Sox needed money. Well, over a period of 4 or 5 years, he sold every good star of that Red Sox team. Many of them went to the Yankees. Well, Fred ended up on that team by 26-27. It was a horrible team. So he ended up there, and he ended up coming back to town here. He met a very untimely death, right, guys? He had a very untimely death.
Yeah.
A very sad death.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a little happier topic, and that's our next Massillon ball player, and it's somebody everybody in the room knows because he was very famous and he lived a good long life, and that's Tom Henrik. Tom Henrik, I knew about Tom before I moved to Massillon because my dad always talked about Tom Henrik. And of course, Tom had the good fortune to play in New York, which is the press capital of the world. And Tom's first claim to fame was that he was the first free agent. He was buried in the Indians farm system and wasn't quite sure who he was playing for, so one winter he wrote a letter to Judge Landis, the commissioner, and asked him that question. Pretty gutsy for a young guy, you know. And Judge Landis called him to New York, and Tom went out there, met with him, and a few weeks later got a letter saying, "Well, young man, I think you are, you know, nobody knows who you belong to, and you're free to sign with whoever you want." And so Tom told me that he spent the winter at the Conrad Hotel over there as the scouts came in from various teams, romancing him to see if they could sign him. And just about every ball club did talk to him, and Tom chose to sign with the Yankees. And of course, you know the rest of the story. He spent a career there from 37 to 51.
Actually, Tommy was one of the greatest clutch hitters of all times. If you remember some of the famous stories about Tommy, in the 1941 World Series, there were 2 out in the 9th inning, and
Mickey Owen dropped the ball.
Mickey Owen dropped the ball. That's right. Now, since you were a Brooklyn Dodger, Roland, you talked about that.
It did nothing but break my heart.
Yes.
my memories of Tommy Hendricks were not really good, fond memories. He would just rip the heart out of the Dodgers in the World Series whenever he got a chance. I think that's why they called him Old Reliable.
Yeah.
See, he always came through when it really mattered. They put him in there, and he did it to us.
Now, he also broke the Dodgers' heart, remember, in 1949, when he hit a home run in the World Series off Don Newcomb,
Right.
1-0, beat him, right?
Yeah, just keep rubbing it in.
Well, Tom retired in 1951, and he stayed on as a coach with the Yankees for a couple of years, and then moved on and coached for some other clubs, including the Detroit Tigers. He was with the Tigers for a couple of years. And we're very fortunate at the museum that we have Tom's 1951 Yankee uniform upstairs. It's one of our more prized acquisitions we made in recent years, and when you come in sometime when it's on display, take a look at it. But that's a really unique artifact. His 1951, his last uniform that he wore on the road for the Yankees.
The one thing about the Yankees, too, the Yankees thought so much of Tommy, especially when Casey Stengel became manager of the Yankees in 1949. He actually asked Tommy to tutor a young shortstop from Commerce, Oklahoma, who had a wild arm, but was fast and powerful, by the name of Mickey Mantle. So it was Tommy that taught Mickey Mantle how to play the outfield.
That is correct. You know, Tommy, those of you who know Tommy, and there's probably a number of you out there who met Tom. Tom was a great storyteller. And I loved listening to him tell stories. And if I may, guys, I would like he was telling one time about a game that they had in Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia A's had a real early first baseman named Ferris Fain. And Ferris was a rough and tumble guy, great hitter, but not the most graceful as a fielder. And during the course of the game, the Yankees had a man on second. The ball was hit to Fain at first base. He threw to third. The ball went in the dirt, and the runner scored. A few innings later, the same play all occurred. And ball hit to Fain. The Yankee runner was on third, was able to score. Now, Tommy, the inning ended, and Tommy was running out to his position at third, in right field, and he had to go past the A's dugout. Fain was coming off first base into the A's dugout, and Connie Mack, the old patrician manager of the A's, stood at the top of the steps and said, "Ferris, don't ever make that play again." And Fain said to him in his gruff way, "What do you want me to do with the ball, Mr. Mack? Stick it in my butt?" And Connie Mack didn't miss a beat. He said, "It would be a lot safer there, Ferris."
You know that the name Old Reliable that Tommy had came from the Yankees broadcaster Mel Allen. If you remember Mel Allen, Mel was a real character. You know, Mel was originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and his name was Mel Israel, was his real name. But when he came to New York, he changed it to Mel Allen, and he really made Tommy famous.
And Tom never forgot his hometown, and as you may know, he came back here many times after his career ended, and that's how I got to know him and really enjoyed hearing the baseball stories. Well, our next guy, chronologically, is, and maybe we're just a little bit out of order, but we'll go back a second, and that's, some of you have forgotten, but it was the Negro Leagues. Remember the Negro Leagues? You've heard of the Negro Leagues, but in the teens and 20s, the Negro Leagues began, and by the 30s and 40s, they had some of the best ball players in the United States. And unfortunately, as we also know, major leagues were segregated until 1947. And we had at least one one Negro League ball player here, and I was lucky enough to meet him when I moved here in the 80s. It was a gentleman named Johnny Bob Dixon. And Johnny is long gone. He passed away in 1985, but he played from the mid-20s to the mid-late 30s in the Negro Leagues. And we don't want to forget that. because today we take it for granted that when we watch a ball game and we see all of the people from all over the world really playing Major League Baseball, that we remember that before 1947, when Jackie Robinson broke the color line, that guys like Johnny Bob were playing in the Negro League. So just want to interject that. Our next guy is the guy who's supposed to be with us this year, or tonight, Mike Hirschberger.
Well, I'll tell you, and the other person who was going to be here was former Judge Rick Kettler. And I talked to Rick, and you know, Mike actually coached his son just a few years ago. His youngest son, Brent, was coached by Mike Hirschberger, and he just couldn't say enough good things about him. Now, you know, we've been talking, and certainly Fast Fothergill and Tommy Hendrick were probably the two overall best players that were produced from Massillon. But Mike Hirschberger wasn't a bad player either. I mean, he was a great defensive outfielder. I remember him robbing the Indians numerous times out in the outfield. But even more than that, he was known for his arm. And he led the league in assists. I think it was 3 years he led the league in assists.
Actually, Mike, too, one of the things I remembered about Mike Hirschberger living in Jamestown was that he was involved in the trade that brought my hero, Rocky Colavito, back to Cleveland. Yeah, and Cleveland, though, gave up, though. It was a three-way trade. The Indians gave up Tommy John. So you know who Tommy John is? Tommy John Surgery? Well, this is before he was famous. He could never get the ball over the plate when he was with the Indians, but immediately when he left the Indians, he became a great pitcher. He and a guy named Tommy Agee went to the White Sox. Tommy Agee ended up being one of the Mets in 1969, one of the a miracle Mets. Then Mike went from the White Sox to Kansas City, and Kansas City sent Colavito back to Cleveland.
Well, I'll tell you, and you know, one thing about Mike is he played at the same time Joe Spartan did for a while. And if he was here, I was going to ask him what it was like to face Joe's fastball. But unfortunately, I'll have to ask him next time. But you know, at the career that Mike had, it was 10 years he played. Brilliant defense, and he also was a pretty good hitter. I mean, that was the time, that was pre-steroids. The averages weren't near what they are now. But, you know, I looked up his pay scale, and in 10 years as a major leaguer, winning all these awards, the most money he ever made was $25,000. That was it.
That was it.
You know, if he had played in this generation, he'd be a multi-millionaire. He'd probably be funding this museum. Right?
Hey, can I get an address for him, please?
You know, Mike played in that golden era, which, and I remember this, living in Jamestown. Of course, the Yankees, that was the golden era. And one of the things I wanted to ask Mike was, Mike's rookie year was 1961. That was the year that Marison Mantle, if you remember, had that great season where they chased Babe Ruth's record. So I'd love to ask Mike if you remembered that. Then Mike also got to play with Kansas City when Charlie Finley owned Kansas City, and Charlie Finley brought in Rick Mundy, Reggie Jackson, Joe Rudy. Any of you Indians fans out there, and Jim Hunter, if any of you Indians fans watched the Indians and Oakland this past weekend, they had the 40th reunion of that 1972 team. And many of those guys on it played with Mike. And I'm sure, and I would have loved to have asked Mike what he thought about those guys. They were all young then. They were all very, very young. And they didn't really hit their stride until they moved to Oakland.
Yeah, people forget what a great team that those Oakland A's teams of the late 60s, early 70s really were.
Yeah, Charlie Finley took over when he brought the mule on the field and those bright colored uniforms. And he just changed the face of the game little by little.
Now, you know, the other thing that I heard, that I'm talking to some people around town, that Mike Hirschberger and Joe Sparmo were friends, that Mike's younger brother Jim, some of you know him probably, was Joe Sparma's best friend. And I know that they did play some together. I understand they played at least 1 year together under Coach Don Reinhardt when Don coached the Massillon Tigers. So I know that they were contemporaries. So what would it have been like to play with Joe Sparma and Mike Hirschberger? That's what I always thought.
Well, there might be somebody out here in our audience who
That
can tell
actually
us.
did play. Anybody play with those guys? Anybody play ball with those guys?
Here we go, we got a
There we
couple
go.
guys.
A couple guys out there, yeah.
Well,
You know, we mentioned Joe Sparma, so let's just segue into, we'll talk about Joe as well, okay, guys?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, I'll start off with, I asked Rick Hetler, you know, because he was playing about that same time that Joe was playing. I said, did you, I know you went out, he wasn't a very good baseball player, but I know you went out. And I said, you ever face Joe Sparma? He says, well, he says, I saw Joe Sparma, and I was at the end of the bench. That's the closest I got.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to tell one Joe Sparma story. When I was a student at Mount Union College, 1968, he had just pitched in the World Series, and we had a convocation over there on a Wednesday, I remember, and Joe came over there with Verge Musser, when Verge ran, some of you remember when Verge ran for Congress against Frank Bowe in that year. Well, Verge, and I never forget it, Verge and Joe walked into the Student Center at Mount Union. Joe had a big smile, he had white shoes on him, he had an expensive suit, and he was up shaking hands and saying, you know, talking to all the students. So I happened to catch out of the corner of my eye, Verge went over, snuck into the lounge, and sat down, and sat all by himself in there. And Joe was working the crowd and shaking hands. Joe would have made a great politician, right?
Of course, we remember Joe up in Detroit because he pitched for the Tigers in '67, '68 when they had some real powerhouse teams and made it to the World Series in '68.
Yeah, well, he had a great arm. And, you know, there were people, even Charlie Gehringer from Detroit, was saying he had a better arm than, or as good an arm as Nolan Ryan. It's just that Joe never knew where the ball was going.
Joe was
inconsistent.
Joe was a quarterback at Ohio State too.
Right, and in Massillon, and he made it to the Stark County High School Football Hall of Fame. I mean, he was a great quarterback for the Tigers. And the big question was, why did he even go to Ohio State? Because Woody Hayes, you know, in those years, it was 3 yards and a cloud of dust. And Joe was a passer, and an excellent passer. But
Why did he go to Ohio State?
Well, the word was that Woody was trying to keep him away from Michigan State.
That's probably true.
So he kept him, and he had 3 quarterbacks, and Joe was one of the 3. And he would just be the passing quarterback. He didn't get to play as much as he should. But when he did play, he was pretty excellent. I mean, his halfback at that time was Paul Werf. You may have heard of him. And he beat Michigan. I think it was one of the biggest games of the year.
So is that why Joe left Ohio State early?
He left early, so he got in an argument with Woody Hayes about playing time, and he decided, I'm going to play baseball.
Well, also, there at that time, because I was living in Jamestown then, we had a Tigers farm team there, and I got to know, my father was treasurer of the local ball club, and I got to meet some of the officials, and I met a guy named Jim Campbell, who Dave knows, who was the farm director at that time, and he was putting together at that time that great Tiger team that later on went to the World Series. And one of the guys that he signed was Joe Sparma, along with another guy named Denny McLean. Now, nobody at the time knew Denny McLean, but Denny McLean was in that same group with Joe Sparma and another guy named Jack DeLauro was in that group. And Jack played in Jamestown. I got a chance to meet him. But that was a good young group of players that Joe joined.
Yeah.
Okay, Roland?
Well, one of the things, I guess Joe was a little bit of a renegade. And not only did he have the run-in with Woody Hayes, I guess later on in Detroit he had a run-in with Dale Smith, the manager there. But one of the things that one of the things that stuck out with me with Joe, when he first got called up to the major leagues and he was facing the Yankees, he was known as a Yankee killer because he had beat the Yankees, I think 5 out of 6, his first 6 times against them. But he was so impressed when he first faced Mickey Mantle that Mickey Mantle stepped up to the plate. Joe walked off the mound, up the home plate, shook Mickey's hand, said, "I'm so happy to meet you. I think you're such a great ball player." And then he went back to the mound and struck him out.
And actually, that was a day that they had for Mickey Mantle Day. And Mantle went back and made a comment to to one of his players in the dugout. Why did they have to throw a young fastballer? Why couldn't they let somebody throw one up to me so I could hit one out? like McLean, yeah.
Okay, well, we have in this short span of time, we've covered all the major leaguers who came out of Massillon, but we've left time for a little more fun. If you think Roland and Dave and I are having fun up here now, we're going to have a little more fun.
Duncan, you want to talk about this here?
Folks, Ray Jeske, ESPN 990, has donated 8 Cincinnati Reds game tickets. The game is next Thursday. These are field box seats, and if you've been to the new stadium down there, it's quite a setup.
It's a day game, too.
Day game. It's a day game. We are going to give these away in sets of 2, and this is what we're going to do to have a little fun. We have 3 baseball experts here, and we are going to ask you to try to stump the experts. If you want to raise your hand, we will call on you. If you can ask a trivia question, baseball trivia, and the gentleman cannot answer it, you will win a pair of these box seats to next Thursday's game in Cincinnati.
But you have to know the answer.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. That's our only condition. You have to know the answer.
So I'll show of hands and I'll try to pick you out right here, sir.
Who was the manager of the winning World Series team in 1954?
Leo DeRocher.
Right.
This isn't going to be easy.
I took my son's picture beside someone that had the same name. My son is David Lundquist. His first time to Cooper.
Again, the name?
Well, Jesse Burkett was a life-size picture in the Hall of Fame. It's not on display now. It's in storage. Who did he play for?
Jesse Burkett.
Yeah.
I'd say the New York Giants.
No.
The answer, sir.
St. Louis.
St. Louis, what St. Louis team?
Cardinals.
Oh, Cardinals, okay.
Congratulations.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Sir? And we'll get John next. Go ahead.
Who's the only guy that scored a touchdown in the Rose Bowl and hit a home run in the World Series?
Great question.
Oh, I know that. Go ahead. Jack Jensen.
You're half right. Jackie Robinson.
Who?
He claims Jackie Robinson's the only one.
What was that again now?
Touchdown in the Rose Bowl and a home run in the World Series.
No, you're right. You're right.
Congratulations. John, you're up. Your question, sir.
Good as a second. Robinson, in case we don't know, played for Southern Cal, right?
Right.
UCLA.
Oh,
Okay, UCLA. Thanks.
We had another man lived in Massillon for about 10 or 12 years. He was with the New York Giants. He only had a few at-bats with them, and he went on to become manager of the Giants. Who was it?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Bill Rigney?
No. It was Charlie Fox.
Charlie Fox. Right. John, you really sandbag us there.
Folks, we have one more set left. Stump the experts. Would you stand, sir?
I wanted to play
Quiet, please.
Who led the team in strikeouts, hitting into double plays, and errors
but still won the most valuable player award. I'll give you a hint. He was a former Indian. He was also a former Yankee. Former Yankee? Oh. Probably.
Can you restate that question? Seriously.
Led the league in strikeouts, striking out, errors, and hitting into double plays, but was the most valuable player.
In the same year, the same season. He was an Indian who later played for the Yankees.
I didn't think it was a Yankee.
A Yankee who played for the Indians.
Wow. He won the World Series.
It's gotta be Joe Gordon.
Well done.
What? Joe Gordon?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow. Oh, we got one right.
We have one more set. Anybody? Up, here we go. Stand up, sir.
Who's the only man that ever substituted batting for Ty Cobb? The only one that ever pinched hit for Ty Cobb.
Get this guy.
That was out of here.
Yep.
Got it.
One more set here.
One more set. Sir, stand up, please.
What gas station gave away pictures of the Indians in the late 50s 4 at a time if you showed up on Monday morning?
Standard Oil.
Wrong, it's Ohio.
Ohio.
You guys got
What I meant.
Yeah. We got two more.
That was,
We got one set left. Shane.
I got one. 1981. Lenny Barker throws his perfect game for the Indians. They beat the Toronto Blue Jays. Who was on the Toronto Blue Jays roster that made his name playing a sport other than baseball?
Danny Ainge played basketball.
Nice.
I wasn't going to roll over to you, Jim.
Alex, can I play?
and we would have named it Cincinnati.
Yes.
3 men have won the National League MVP 3 times or more. 2 of them are Roy Campanella and Stan the Man Musial. Name the third.
How about Mike Schmidt?
You got it. Well done.
Wow. How about a really hard?
Oh, back over here.
No, here we go.
During when Ty Cobb made the most money, his salary from baseball in the early 20s, from what single source did he make more money than his salary from baseball?
Coca-Cola stock.
Over here.
Somebody teaches in the baseball.
You do know the answer, right?
You know the answer, right?
I do.
280.
Way off. 108.
Okay, we got us.
We're done.
Now, don't we have some more here?
We've got a bonus. We got a bonus.
We got a bonus. The Boys Club have some for us too, don't they?
They have 4 tickets.
4 tickets for tonight's game. Indians games?
Four
4 tickets for tonight.
4 bleacher tickets for tonight's game. So we got another trivia question back there.
Cy Young. He's buried in southern Ohio. Do you know what town it's in? It's a small town.
Pioli.
Right.
Wow. What former Massillon baseball coach, his wife is related to Cy Young? You said Reinhardt. That's right, Don Reinhardt.
Okay, another question? Duncan.
Dave Winfield, Minnesota Gopher great and Hall of Famer. Played 3 sports in college, all of which he was drafted for the pros. Name the other 2.
Basketball and football.
That's it.
That's my best shot.
Come on, we got tickets back here.
This may be a novel
Here we go.
concerning Schultz Pharma. Who is credited or who is known by some who taught him how to throw the curveball? Nobody connected with the major league, but somebody, a position player on his team.
Well, that's a
Who
great
taught him how to
question.
throw
That's a great question.
Who taught him how to throw the curveball? He recognized this fastball.
I wish I had Jim Snively up here with me because he could probably give me the answer. Boy, we don't know. That's a tough one.
David Stump, the answer, sir?
My son, the catcher.
Who was who?
What's his name? Joe Turkle.
Oh, Joe Turkle. Okay. Boy, you really sandbagged.
Yeah.
We got one more. Mel Hurricane has graciously donated a brand new Cincinnati Reds baseball cap. So we got one more prize for one more trivia question.
Your question? We're all out of tickets. Oh, yeah. Oh, ball cap, I'm sorry.
I've got a ball hat here for you.
You mentioned Danny McLean. What, outside of pitching, outside of playing ball in his normal daily life, did he become known for?
For his organ playing.
That may be so that's not what I mean.
Chicola.
Yeah, he drank a case of 30 bottles of Pepsi or Coca-Cola a day. Right?
Captain's still up for...
Still got one more here. Yes. Yes.
The great St. Louis Cardinals teams of the 20s and 30s featured the Dean brothers. What was the nickname of that famous team?
Dizzy and Daffy.
The Gas House Gang.
Oh, yes. Okay. I want to give it. We got one more guy in the back here. Who else had a question?
This is an easy one. The greatest trade Cleveland probably made. We got Vizquel, Omar Vizquel. Who did we get to get Vizquel?
Felix Vermain.
Right.
Felix Vermain, that's right.
I want to give this hat to somebody who's got a question for us.
I have a question, but I don't have the answer.
I got the answer.
We have the answer then.
Here's a guy here in the front row here.
What was the first championship team that Mike Hirschberger ever played on in his life?
It was a Pony League team that Don Reinhardt coached, right, in 54 or 5?
Wrong.
No?
It was Little League. Master Steel Castings.
Okay. Give it.
51.
That wraps it up for us. We got one other quick announcement we want to make, so stay seated for this announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement. The baseball expert panel is pleased to announce that the Elam family has just commissioned artist and Massillon Museum membership coordinator Scott Phillips to paint a mural honoring baseball great Tommy Henrich on the Tommy Henrich Boulevard side of the Elam Music Company building. Phillips is known for his murals depicting iconic Massillon greats Paul Brown and Lillian Gish, and is excited to be working on this project. According to George Elam, Phil, Eddie, and I have been discussing this project for a while, and not only wanted to honor Tommy, but keep the work local. Scott's art speaks for itself, and we're pleased to have engaged a fellow Massillonian and talented painter. Work will begin on the mural later this spring.
Thank you all for coming. Roland and David and I were glad to be with you. So play ball.
They go.